Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our iOS development with UIKit tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can filter our table view using a UI search controller. So what this will allow us to do is it'll allow us to enter a search term and then filter our data in our table however we would like to filter it, and then and then see the search results as we type. Now, there are many ways that you can use UI Search Controller. There are different ways that you can customize it and all of that stuff. But we're gonna go with the most basic way to get you started, and then you can go and read the documentation to learn a little bit more about some other ways that you can customize this and go out and experiment a little bit. All right, so let's go into Xcode and run our application to take a look at what we have to start the video off with. All right. So when we run the application, here we have a table view split into many sections, where we have one section for national parks, one section for monuments, and then another section for state capitals or cities. So we're going to be able to filter this list of cities, and other landmarks based on a search term. Now, one thing to keep in mind about a UI search controller is that in order to use it, your view controller must be embedded in a navigation controller, because the search controller will be assigned to the navigation item.searchController property. All right, so keep that in mind. You have to use a UI navigation controller to embed the view controller with the data that you want to filter. All right, so now that we've seen what application we're going to start with, let's go ahead and actually configure our UI search controller. So inside of the configure method, let's see here. There we go. Right below where I'm registering my table view cell, we're going to say let search controller equals a UI search controller, and this initializer is going to take in a search results controller. It's an optional UI search results controller. Well, okay, it's an optional UI view controller instance, and this view controller, my apologies, it's not UI search results controller. It's just a UI view controller instance. This can be nil, or it can be populated by some UI view controller subclass. This would be used to display your search results, but we're not going to use a separate view controller for that, so we'll set that as nil. It'll be, okay, there we go. We'll just have nil in there, just like that. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to configure a couple properties of our UI search controller. So the first thing that I want to customize is I want to customize the placeholder of the search bar. Now this search bar is an instance of UI search bar. If you want, you can read the documentation for UI search bar if you want to use one of those on its own without having a UI search controller, which is certainly another way to do search functionality if that's what you want. But we'll go ahead and do search controller dot search bar dot placeholder equals search for a location. All right. Next, we'll say search controller dot is active. Now, the is active property on UI search controller is a Boolean property that will specify whether or not the that'll specify whether or not the search bar is actually visible, right? So you can set this explicitly, or if you don't set it explicitly, the UI search controller will change the value of is active based on whether or not, for example, the user has scrolled up to the top of the screen far enough to pull it down to be visible. If you set is active to true, it'll always be visible, which is what we're going to do here. Equals true. Because there are cases where you just want the search bar to always be visible. And so that's just what we're going to replicate here. You do what your design calls for, because every app is going to be different. It's going to have different requirements per app. The next thing that we want is we want to specify whether or not the search controller will obscure anything. So we'll say search controller okay, come on, Xcode. There we go. Search controller dot obscures background during presentation. We do not want this to obscure the background when it's presented, so we will set that to false. Maybe your design does call for that, then you can set that to true. Really, again, it depends on what your design calls for the app that you're working on. Search controller dot all right. And the last thing that we want is we want the search results updater property. Now, this is going to be set to a class that conforms to the UI search results updating protocol. You can have that be in a separate class, or you can have that be in your view controller. Preferably, it should be in a separate class, but we're going to make our view controller conform to that protocol just to keep things a little bit simpler. But again, the best practice would be to have that be in a separate class. That way you have separation of concerns with the MVC pattern. And we'll talk a little bit more about MVC towards the end of the series. But that's besides the point. We'll set this equal to self. Now, Xcode is going to yell at us because our view controller does not conform to UI search results updating, and we will conform to that protocol here in a second. But the last thing that we need to do is actually place our search controller in the navigation item. We've configured our search controller. Now we need to actually place it somewhere. So we'll say navigation item Okay, Xcode. If you could cooperate, that would be fantastic. Navigation item dot search controller. You can see that this is a UI search controller. And because not every navigation controller is going to have a search controller in its navigation item, it's optional. The default value is nil. We'll set this equal to search controller, just like that. Now, let's go back up to the top of our view controller. And after our UI view controller inheritance, we will add a comma. And then we'll say UI search results updating, like that. Now, this protocol requires that we implement one method. And this method will be used to update the table view every time the search term changes. So what we're going to do here is we will say func okay, it's being uncooperative again, like always. Update. There we go. Update search results for UI search results controller. Yep. For UI search controller. Da 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 da. Now, inside of here, what we want to do is we will say if search controller dot search bar dot, well, what we want to do first is get the text from the search bar. So we'll say guard let search term equals search controller dot search bar dot text, because text is going to be an optional string. We want to make sure that the text property isn't nil. Else, we will simply return like that. Now we can say if search term is empty, then self dot national parks will be equal to constants dot locations dot filter where $0 dot category is equal to dot national park. Self dot monuments is going to be equal to constants dot locations dot filter $0 dot category is equal to dot monument, and self dot cities is equal to constants dot locations dot filter $0 dot category is equal to dot city. So what we're saying here to start with is we're basically saying, hey, if the search term is empty, then make sure that we just reset our cities, monuments, and national parks arrays to have everything. And then at this point, we can say table view reload data and then return. Because after this point, we don't really need to do anything else. So we can just return out of the method. If the search term is not empty, then things will get slightly more complicated with the filter predicate, but not too much more complicated. Let's go ahead and take a look at how that will work. So what we want is we're going to write another method here. Now this method, let's see. I want to make sure that I don't have it already here. Okay, so we do have the method already. I'm going to go through this so we can understand what we're doing here. Well, okay. So because I already have this filter here, we can just get rid of this if statement altogether. But let's go over this method here. So we have a method called filter. And what's happening is that we are pretty much saying, hey, give us the locations that we can filter through, give us the search term, and then give us the category that we want to filter for. Inside of this method, we are filtering. We're not filtering for anything quite yet. We're saying if the search term isn't empty, then we simply want to just return everything. Right. So if the search term is empty, just return everything based on the category. If it isn't empty, then we are filtering based on the search term. So if the location name contains the search term, and then if the category, if the category is based on that category that we pass in. Nothing too complicated there. If you don't fully understand how this works, I urge you to, I honestly do urge you to read up a little bit more on the guard statement and how filter works, because they are crucial here. So inside of this method then, that we have for this protocol conformance, we can say self dot national parks equals filter I will say constants dot locations we want the search term, and then the category that we want to filter for. So that's National Park. And then we'll say self.monuments equals filter. Constants.locations. Search term. And then dot monument. And then self dot, we'll say cities equals filter constants dot locations search term and dot city, like that. Once we've done that, we can say table view reload data, like that. So let's go over what we did here from beginning to end. So I'm going to go all the way up to configure here. The first thing we did was we created a UI search controller object. This takes in a search results controller, which we set to nil. This is an optional UI view controller for displaying the search results. We've gone ahead and configured our search controller by setting the placeholder of the search bar. We've specified whether or not the search controller is active. In this case, we've said yes, we want it to always be active. We've specified that we don't want our search controller to obscure the background when it's presented. We've set the search results updater for the search controller to our view controller itself. And then we've placed our search controller in the navigation item of our UI navigation controller that contains this view controller. Then we went and added a protocol conformance to our view controller, where we are now conforming to UI search results updating. We have a method after, we have a method here where that's going to be used for filtering out the search results. This filter method takes in the locations to filter through. It takes a string for the search term, and then it takes the specific category of the location to filter for. Inside of this method, we use a guard statement to determine whether or not the search term is not empty, and if it is, then we simply return everything for the given location category. If the search term is empty, or rather isn't empty, I should say, we are filtering for any location whose name contains the search term and their category matches the category we passed in. Once we've done that, inside of the update search results method that we are required to provide an implementation for, we are simply setting our 3 different arrays of data to the results of our filter method for each different category of data. So cities, national parks, and monuments. Once we've done that, we reload all the data in the table view. Now that we have that all squared away, let's go ahead and run our code and see what happens. We can replace our currently running application. We have a successful build. Now you can see, here's our search bar in the navigation bar, or navigation item of our navigation controller. We can type anything we want in here. So we can say maybe anything that starts with LI, like capital L and an I. Right? Anything that has those two letters in it will show up in our table now. So we don't have any national parks that have that, so our national park section is empty. We do have monuments with that in there, so our monument section is not empty. And for monuments, we have Statue of Liberty and the Lincoln Memorial. For cities, it's not empty either. So for cities, we have Little Rock, Arkansas, and we have Lincoln, Nebraska. All right, so that is a UI search controller in UIKit. Now, before I go, we can clear the text, and when that happens, now our table is back to normal. We have all of our landmarks, we have all of our cities, everything. So with that pretty much does it for this video, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we will see you all in the next video.